Today's video is going to be the first in a small series where I migrate my home network away from UniFi and take a look at other options. So as you can see, my current home network is fully UniFi. We have a UDM-Pro as the router and UniFi controller and UniFi Protect and all that sort of stuff. We have UniFi switches, a UniFi Nano HD access point, and some UniFi cameras that I'm using with UniFi Protect, which is also running on the UDM-Pro. And don't get me wrong, it runs absolutely brilliantly. This isn't a, oh I hate UniFi, UniFi's terrible type video. UniFi is great, I love it. I just want a different experience for my home network. I just want to try out new things and move on and try other options. Because I personally I like trying lots of different things. I don't like siloing myself into a corner where I try lots of different options, find one I like, such as UniFi, and go, right, I do UniFi now. UniFi is my thing. I live on UniFi now. Because you get a lot of people do that. They'll try all sorts of things. They'll try UniFi, they'll like it, and they'll start calling themselves networking engineers, and all they actually know is UniFi and nothing else. I don't want to turn into that. I want to try all different options that are out there, not just focus on UniFi. So UniFi is an absolutely great option, and it's still my go-to option if someone wants a simple home network or maybe a very small business and they want to be able to set it up easily, manage it themselves, and not require a lot of expert involvement to manage it. Especially when it comes down to me setting up networks for people, I'm not in the business of tech support. So if I set a network up for someone, I want it to be something that they can then take on and manage themselves. I don't want to set something up and then have to be the point of contact for even the slightest change. Oh, they want to change their Wi-Fi password. Oh, they want to add a new VLAN, and then they have to come to me to do that. With UniFi, I know that I can set that network up for them, quickly show them how it works, and they can very easily configure it themselves, manage it themselves, and if they get stuck, there's a lot of documentation online and it's very easy to follow. So for that sort of setting, UniFi is great. But for me, I like tinkering. I want to be able to swap out different firewalls, I want to try different switches, try different access points. And while UniFi is fully open in terms of just using standard networking technologies, there's nothing stopping me plugging a different switch into this or a different access point. When you've got that fully UniFi environment, it's a really sort of hard mental block to plug non-UniFi equipment into it and have it disappear out of the shiny dashboards. So over the next few videos, probably over a few months, because it's a very expensive project, so the budget's needing to stretch out a little bit, I'll be replacing all my UniFi kit with different options from different vendors. Now, if you've seen my previous video, you'll probably know what we're doing in this video, and that is we're replacing my UDM-Pro as my router with a new router. And in my previous video we took a look at it, and it's this device here, which is a cheap 1U server from AliExpress. So it's a relatively expensive 1U server. It's got an Intel Atom C3558 CPU, and it's actually quite nicely spec'd. It's got 6 gigabit Intel NICs and a pair of 10 gigabit SFP Plus ports that run off the Atom SoC. So this is a really nice little firewall. So I'll be replacing the UDM with this. Now in my previous video I ran PFSense on this, and I just really did that because that's what I'm used to. I use PFSense elsewhere, so it made sense just to set it up on this to try it out. However, a few people mentioned OPNsense, which I haven't really looked into since, I remember it came out, I ran it for a little bit, and I haven't really probably looked at it since like, probably 2016, something like that. So I haven't looked into OPNsense for a long time. But it seems to be a bit more mature nowadays, so I thought I'd give it a go. So I've put OPNsense on it and also made an OPNsense sticker and stuck it on the front as well, because why not? So I've run OPNsense on this, so we'll set it up with OPNsense and see how we get on with it. So yep, we're taking out the UDM-Pro and putting this in. And this should hopefully give me a lot more flexibility, because with UniFi, I feel there's different levels of maturity, and I did a video where I sort of talked about this, and my opinions then are very much still my opinions now. With UniFi, their access points are very mature. You could really use them in pretty large deployments, pretty large networks, and they'd work really well. Their switching is also pretty mature. You know, if you've got a pretty big network, you could still get quite a long way with UniFi switching. They've maybe not got all the layer 3 stuff and some very advanced switching stuff, but if you just want basic access switches, the UniFi stuff is very good for that. But when it comes to their firewalling and routing, it's quite basic. If you're just wanting a few different networks, connecting out to the internet, some firewall rules between them, maybe some very basic VPN type stuff, they're good for that. But beyond that, you're going to start hitting limitations, and that's kind of what I found with the UDM-Pro. It works absolutely great. But if I want to try out lots of weird tinkering type things and try all different types of things and different VPN tunnels and all this kind of stuff, the UDM just gets really limited and you constantly just end up hitting a brick wall. And realistically, since I've got this, I've kind of not really done much advanced or network config type stuff at home. I've just used it as is. Whereas previously I had all sorts of like IPv6 tunnels, IPv6 over IPv4 type tunnels and stuff like that set up. With this, I've not got any of that. So it'll be really nice going back to OPNsense and having a fully powerful firewall that I can tinker about with. However, it's not quite as simple as just taking the UDM and swapping in the new firewall. And that's because as great as UniFi is, and as welcoming as UniFi is, and it's so easy to get him on board and have all your devices pulled into it, what it does mean is when you want to move away from it, things get a little bit trickier. Previously, I had a USG Pro, so just a UniFi Security Gateway Pro. So that was a standalone security gateway, and I had a separate UniFi controller that ran on a server. So in that situation, it would actually be relatively easy just to change some config in the UniFi controller, pull out the USG, and put in the new firewall. However, now with the UDM, this runs everything. So this not only is the firewall, but it's also the NVR for my cameras, and it's the UniFi controller. So when I pull this out, I'm going to lose the UniFi controller to allow me to manage the switches and access point that I'm going to keep using for a while. And it'll also stop me being able to use the NVR for my cameras. Now, long term, as part of this project, I'm going to be putting in new switching. I've got some very interesting switches lined up we'll be taking a look at. And way down the line, I'll probably look at new camera options, see what other options there are out there. But for now, I want to keep the UniFi switches and UniFi access points up and running. So we're going to need a new controller. So for that, we're going to put my CloudKey Gen2 Plus back into service. So I used to run this before I got the UDM-Pro, and this was my UniFi controller and my NVR. So we'll be putting this back into service. So this will act as my UniFi controller and NVR, and this will basically put back into service. Now, you'll have noticed when I put the UDM in, I actually continued to use this as my NVR, and then it mysteriously disappeared. That's because it turns out these have built-in lithium-ion batteries, and the idea is it works like a UPS. If you disconnect the power from it, it will cleanly shut itself down from battery power. However, the battery in mine had failed, and it seems quite a common issue. In fact, I saw a thread online saying they no longer put batteries in them. Not sure how true that is, but it was a very known issue that the batteries in these would swell up and fail. So when I found out about this and saw these pictures of these batteries swelling, I immediately pulled this out because I wasn't happy having a device sitting there fully powered on 24/7 with a failing lithium-ion battery in it for obvious reasons. So this sat in its box for ages. I've since dismantled it and taken the battery out, and it runs fine without the battery in it. In my next video, I'll do a sort of little extra video where I do a teardown of this, taking the battery out and demonstrate how to remove the battery from one of these. So now I've got this with the battery removed so it's safe to use, so we're putting this back into service as my UniFi controller and NVR. So yeah, that's the CloudKey there. And also stand by for that future video where I do a teardown of this. So I suppose the next thing to do really is just power down the UDM and swap the new firewall in, and probably break everything in the process. So it may be possible to copy my UniFi config over. Realistically, the actual config in terms of switches and access point isn't that complicated, so I might just write down the switch port assignments and just swap the new firewall straight in. So I suppose the next thing to do really is switch off the UDM, pull it out the rack, and get the new firewall in. Okay, so no turning back now. Time to say goodbye to UniFi. So there's my UDM-Pro still working. So I'm going to disconnect power to it, get out of the rack. At that point the network's now down, and now I've got a scary thing to rush to get it all back online before I need to work from home tomorrow, so that'll be exciting. So here we go. So time to turn off the UDM-Pro for the last time. There we go, that's now unplugged. So what I need to do is just get out the rack really, and get the new device all set up instead. Okay, so that's it now disconnected, disconnected and turned off, so in theory, just take these four screws out, and we can pull it out. Ultimately, I'm probably actually going to completely rearrange this rack. Once the new switches go in, I'll want to do it a little bit different. Also, I've moved these rails way further forward to fit the UDM because it's quite deep. The new stuff isn't nearly as deep as this, so I can probably move the front rails back a bit and get a bit more cable management space, but I'm not going to do that right now. I just need to get the network back online right now, to be honest, but I'll probably end up rearranging all this at the point that I put the new switches in, but for now this will do. So let's just take all these screws out, like that, and remove the UDM from the rack. So, well, that was falling over, interesting. Carefully slide this out so that can come out there. So here in the back there we have a right angle power cable I had to use for this because it's so deep it was hitting off the back of the rack. But there we go. That's UDM pulled out. Okay, so that's UDM now removed. All the cables now out of the way, so I've also swapped the power cable out for a non-right angled one, just because I don't really need it right now, and I may as well keep the right angled one out in case I need it for something else. I might need to put it back in when I move the rails back, we'll figure that out later. But now time to put the new firewall in. So, we have it here. Now, the first thing to note is on the back of it, that it has a power switch, so I'll need to switch that to on before I put it in the rack, otherwise it'll be hard to get into it. I can take the side panel off and potentially get my hand in, but I may as well just make sure it's switched on there, and then plug the power cable in, like that. And now hopefully we can get this into the rack, so let's just carefully slide it in. Definitely want to properly rearrange this rack once I get the new switches in, but this will do for now, putting it straight in here. So get that, get the screws. Probably giving you an absolutely dreadful view right now because I'm trying to balance it with the hand right in front of the camera, but this will do for now just to get it in. So that's one side screwed in there. Now the other side, like that. And then we'll be able to start connecting it up, and then the long process of configuration starts. The firewall's already mostly configured, still need to set up some firewall rules and stuff, which I helpfully just realised I forgot to note down from the UDM, so that'll be great. But I've got to set up all the switches and stuff again, so I'll need to redo that. So that's now in there. So what we'll now do is we plug that in, it'll turn on. So I'm going to leave that just now, get the network cables in. So that's just 2 more screws I'll need to put to rack mount it as well. So I'll do that now, and then we'll come back. Okay, so that's all now installed. So now to do all the connections. So a few different connections go in. So here we have the WAN connection. This is my G-Fast connection. That goes into my modem, so it connects up to the patch panel, down to the modem that's off to the side here. So that can plug into WAN 1. We then have this connection here that comes from the PoE injector. This will soon be replaced with a PoE switch. This goes to a wireless access point in the living room that is set up as a station, so I can connect my phone's hotspot to it and use it as a secondary backup WAN connection. So if a main internet connection goes down, I can switch on my phone's hotspot and it'll connect it through into the firewall. So I did a video about that previously, if people are interested. It's quite a fun project, dead simple and dead cheap to set up. So I'll plug this into WAN 2 on the new firewall. In full honesty, this isn't actually configured for this yet. I've not got around to setting that up, but once this is all working and I've got the network running off this, I'll set this up as a secondary WAN connection. As you can see finally here, there's 2 more ports that I've got labelled. There's trunk and management. So management is just on the management VLAN. If I plug into that, it gives me an IP address and I can configure the firewall and also any other devices on the management VLAN. Trunk then trunks all the VLANs down to the switch. So this is what I'll be connecting up to the switch. Now long term, I'll be connecting this to switches over SFP DAC cables at 10 gigabit. However, with this switch, this is only a gigabit switch. So these are gigabit SFP ports. And so if I was to use a DAC cable between here and here, it wouldn't work. You would need some way to force this to run the SFP port at gigabit speeds, and I couldn't find a way to do that in OPNsense. I think if you're to use separate optics, so you're using like a optical transceiver in here or something like that, that would work because you'd use a gigabit one on each end, and that would tell this it's gigabit and force the link down to gigabit speeds. But because I'm using a DAC cable, I can't do that between the 2 devices. So all I'll do for now is I've just reassigned. Instead of using one of these as a trunk port, I'm using one of the RJ45 ports for now. So I'll just plug that up into the switch, and that'll do for now. And then eventually, once I get the new switches, that'll be taken out, and I'll be using this as one of these SFP ports as one of the trunk connections. So in theory, that's all the connections there. I can get that SFP RJ45 module that really upset people out. It was literally just in there because I needed some more switch ports, so putting the uplink into that meant that those switch ports were freed up, but there's a few ports free now, so I don't really need that, so that can come out. And then now we can hopefully, well, power it up and start configuring. Although before I do that, what I'll do is I'll just go away and I'll reset all the UniFi kit, because currently it's all going to be set up with various VLANs that won't match this new firewall and all that sort of stuff. So I'll go away, reset all the UniFi kit, we'll get the CloudKey put in as well, and then we'll fire up this firewall. Okay, so I've now reset all the UniFi devices, so they're all sitting with white LEDs, which means that they're essentially working as unmanaged switches, so they're just passing all the traffic on all the ports, so it's just acting as one big standard unmanaged switch, and it's also ready to be adopted by a controller. So what I can now do is I can put in the CloudKey, get it all set up, go on, connect to that, it can find all these, and then I can start configuring it. And the good thing is that in the meantime, all devices can still communicate. So here we have the CloudKey, so this is what we're going to be putting in. Now, this can either be powered over USB-C or PoE, so I'll be using PoE. So for that, because I've not got PoE switch, I'm still using this rack mount injector, which people hate, which I really don't see the issue. It's fine, it's a completely viable product. So I'll be connecting the switch up into the PoE injector, like that. And then I'll be running a cable out of the PoE injector into the CloudKey. And obviously, yes, the new switch I'm getting, I am getting a PoE switch, so that'll make people happy. But we'll just continue to use this for now. So that can plug into the PoE output on that. If I can get it in, there we go. See that over the patch panel. And we'll bring it in the back here and into the back of the CloudKey. So get that round there, pull that through, just like that. And then we can plug the CloudKey in. So here we have it here. So all we need to do now is just plug that into the back and we'll see it'll light up and start to boot. Now you'll notice that the screen isn't working on this. It's because, let's just say, when I took the battery out, I had a little bit of an accident and I kind of broke the screen. So the OLED in this no longer works, but it was actually really badly screen burned anyway, so you couldn't really see what was on it anyway. But yeah, the screen isn't lighting up, that's normal. I kind of broke it, but it is booting, so that's fine. In a while that light will go on solid white, indicating it's ready to be set up. Or maybe solid blue, because I can't remember how far I set this up, but that'll start up. So that's now ready. So I suppose the final thing we need to do is turn on the firewall. So we've now got so we end up with a firewall on the network. That means we can actually start configuring things. Things will get IP addresses, all that sort of stuff. So moment of truth, let's fire up the new router. So power cable here, let's plug it in, see what happens. Well, that was exciting, wasn't it? It turned on, as I expected. So I'm just gonna let that boot up there. Once that's booted up, I'll be able to go in and configure the network. So yep, let's let this start up. I'll go away, set it all up off camera, I'm not going to bother demonstrating all that, and we'll come back once it's all working. Okay, so things are happening. As you can see, very precarious, terrible, dodgy things are happening, but things are happening. So obviously I turned it all on, all the switches just acted as one big unmanaged switch, which let me connect through to the CloudKey Gen2 Plus and access it. So what I did just to see if it would work is I imported the config backup from my old UDM-Pro, and it did. So it took that config, all the networks that were previously shown as being like having subnets and stuff that were associated with the UDM automatically turned just to VLAN only type subnets, so that seemed to actually work. And all the switches configured themselves. What that also meant that all I actually needed to do was just go into the CloudKey and just change the VLAN IDs. And if I'd kept the same VLAN IDs between the old network and the new network, I wouldn't have even needed to change that. They were just a bit messy on the old ones, so I redid all the VLAN IDs. So literally all I needed to do was go into the CloudKey and change the VLAN IDs. However, I was then a bit confused because suddenly the CloudKey that had previously seen all the switches and sort of adopted them all, then couldn't see any of the UniFi devices. I was thinking, what's happened here? But of course what had happened is the switch, which had previously been an unmanaged switch, had configured itself with the old settings. So the port my laptop was plugged into and the port the CloudKey were plugged into were both configured as the IoT VLAN. So my laptop and CloudKey could continue to talk to each other, but nothing else could communicate. And the CloudKey could no longer communicate with the switches. So that wasn't going to work. Now it seems with UniFi that essentially VLAN 1 is the management VLAN. So in order for this to work, I would need to connect the CloudKey to a port that's assigned to the management VLAN. However, none of these ports are. And in order to change the port assignments, I would need to get into the CloudKey. But I can't get into the CloudKey because there's no ports assigned. It's a bit of a catch-22 situation. However, the trunk port on this, obviously the native VLAN on that, is the management VLAN. So what I've ended up doing also is the trunk port, I've now had to connect the uplink into the RJ45 to SFP adapter again. That's just because that was the trunk port configured previously and none of the other ports were configured as trunk ports, so I've gone back to that. So what I've had to do is connect the trunk port coming out the switch, out the firewall, into a switch, connect the switch into the trunk port on the UniFi switch, and then plug the CloudKey into the external switch. My laptop's also plugged into that. That then meant that the CloudKey was then back on the management VLAN, which then allowed me to get into the CloudKey, configure it, and the CloudKey can now also configure the switches. So what I'll now do is, because this is very precarious balance and some chairs are hooked on a hook on the wall, it's very not secure, I'm going to go in, reconfigure it to set up a port on this switch as being on the management VLAN, which I can then plug the CloudKey in, and it should all work. And then weirdly, yes, I had to use this massive switch because I initially thought, oh, I just need to stick a switch in. So I stuck this little TP-Link switch, it's whatever that model number is there, a little unmanaged thing. And it just wouldn't pass traffic that had VLAN tags. Like, the interface has a native VLAN, so it's untagged for the management VLAN and then has tagged VLANs for all the other stuff. But as soon as I plugged this in, no traffic would pass. Not even the traffic on the untagged VLAN would pass through it. It just wasn't working. So I don't know if these switches are known to have really weird behaviour when passing traffic that contains VLANs even though they're unmanaged. I thought it would work, but obviously didn't. So I've had to put a managed switch in there that is just sitting at its factory config. There's no management configuration on that, but it's at least passing the VLANs correctly. So all I need to do now is go into the CloudKey settings, configure one of the ports on that UniFi switch there as on the management VLAN, plug the CloudKey into it, and we should be good to go. And I can get rid of that precariously balanced switch. So yeah, time to go do that, and fingers crossed. And with that, it's all up and running. So yeah, bit fiddly there trying to get a port on the management VLAN to put the CloudKey on, but I was able to fix that. I think in hindsight, if I'd known that, all I would do is I would just make sure that before I took the UDM down, I assigned a port on one of the switches to be this just on the standard default management VLAN, I think it's VLAN 1, and have that ready for the CloudKey to plug into, and then I wouldn't have had any of that issue there. But it's now up and running, so as you can see, we've now got my new firewall in there. Where is it? There we are, new firewall in there. And we have the CloudKey Gen2 Plus sitting on the shelf below, powered over PoE, acting as a UniFi controller. And eventually, once I get around setting it up, that'll also run as UniFi Protect for my cameras. So with all that in, all I really need to do now is go in and try and configure some firewall rules. I think currently it's allowing traffic to pass between all the VLANs, which I don't necessarily want, so I need to go and put some block rules in there. But other than that, it seems to be working. So yeah, hopefully that was an interesting video. Hopefully it wasn't as long as my normal videos, but I thought I would do a quick sort of update video to show really me installing this and explain my rationale behind installing it. Because when I showed this in my previous video, quite a few people commented saying, wait, don't you have a UDM? Or wait, what's happening to the UDM? Are you replacing the UDM? So I thought I'd do this video explaining this project, explain what I'm doing, and show me installing it. So yep, that's it now installed. So now I'm no longer a full UniFi home network. I've now got an OPNsense box in there. And stand by for future videos where we'll be fitting even more kit. We'll be putting in some new managed switches that look quite cool. We'll be putting in new access points. I mean, we'll be trying something that's not UniFi, which is a bit weird because obviously UniFi is an absolutely great access point for home use, but I wanted to try something a bit different. And hopefully off the back of all that, I'll be able to try a lot of new things, try different things out, try all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas that you just can't quite get UniFi to do. So yeah, really looking forward to this project, and I can't wait to produce future videos showing the other things I'm doing. So definitely stay tuned for them. But yeah, I guess all that's left to say now is thank you very much for watching. And if you're interested in buying one of these AliExpress servers to run as your own firewall, I'll put links in the video description.